The WorkShare program is designed to help both employers and employees. So instead of laying off workers, a qualified employer can plan to reduce work hours for at least 2 employees. Under the CARES Act, once the plan is approved, the federal government will pay 100% of the unemployment benefits paid through that WorkShare plan. Employers' future tax rates will not be impacted by the WorkShare benefits paid through December 26, 2020. Employees will remain covered under their retirement plans they're enrolled in with their employer, and the employer will maintain that health insurance coverage for them as if they're regularly employed. The plan must include a minimum of at least 2 employees, Wisconsin employees, and the reduction of hours must be at least 10%, but not more than 60% of the normal hours. Seasonal, temporary, or staff that are employed on an intermittent basis are excluded, and only employees that have been employed by the employer for a period of at least 3 months on the effective date of the WorkShare program can be participants. Workers whose hours are reduced under the approved WorkShare plan then will receive unemployment benefits that are prorated for the partial work reduction. The weekly benefit rate is multiplied by that percentage of reduction in hours and then rounded down to the nearest whole dollar. WorkShare plan employees who are eligible for a benefit in the week would also be eligible for the additional $600 per week under the federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation Program. This program runs from the week ending 4/4/2020 through 7/25/2020. That $600 is not prorated. An individual who is eligible for a payment in the week will get the full $600. This program, though, will end with the week ending July 25th, 2020.
So today, using the questions that many of you submitted representing the businesses in our region, Heidi is going to answer those questions about the WorkShare program. And in order to ensure that we get through all the questions previously submitted, during today's virtual seminar, participant microphones will be muted, but you can still ask your questions through the use of the chat box feature. We'll collect those questions, work with Heidi, and then get back to you with those answers if you have additional questions that arise during the presentation. So we'll also provide you to links today with both the Workforce Development Board of South Central Wisconsin and the Department of Workforce Development that you can use as a resource moving forward. Additionally, today's presentations will be recorded and will be made available on our website so that you can share it with others or refer back to it if needed. So with our housekeeping items out of the way, let's begin. Our first question for Heidi today is, how long does it take for the plan and/or modifications to be approved by DWD?
So generally speaking, new plans will take about 1 to 2 weeks to get approved, while modifications are taking a little bit longer, within 1 to 3 weeks. However, this program is still gaining popularity, so these timelines could change going forward.
Is a company allowed to participate in the WorkShare program if they've already completed a couple of layoffs? And additionally, can the program be used if previously furloughed or laid off employees are recalled to work?
Yes, the company may participate in the WorkShare program in these situations as long as the plan still saves an estimated number of additional layoffs going forward.
Is there any length of time during or after the plan that layoffs are not allowed?
Layoffs are still allowed as long as the plan is still saving other employees from full layoffs.
How many different plans can be in place at one time, and how frequently can they be modified, or does the schedule have to remain consistent over the entire plan?
Employers can have as many plans as they would like. For plans covered under Act 185, which is the new legislation that was passed here in April related to WorkShare, really the only reasons to modify would be to add or remove participants or to extend the end date of a plan. So as long as the participants have their hours reduced between that 10 to 60%, they will remain eligible as a WorkShare participant.
Heidi, do you have any recommendations on methods of communicating with employees in this program? For example, is email acceptable?
We would recommend offering the employees the WorkShare fact sheet from our website, and you can see the link to the unemployment insurance website is provided. And yes, emails are an acceptable method of communicating information about the program with employees.
Other than those specific exclusions listed, seasonal, temp, intermittent, employed less than 3 months, are there any other employees that are not allowed to participate in this program, such as plant manager or other leadership positions?
No, I'm not aware of any other exclusions, just those specifically that you've listed.
Can you please explain how salaried employees are allowed to participate in the program?
Sure. So WorkShare is based on hours of pay, not actually the pay itself, so not the gross wages or the other types of pay. So salaried employees will need to reduce their hours of work each week in order to be eligible, and the maximum number of hours that can be considered their normal hours would be 40.
Can the plan be for the entire company? For example, dark Fridays across the board?
Yes, an employer could have one plan, and in that plan, the employer could choose to reduce the hours, for example, by 20%. So that would be 4 days a week or 32 hours, however the employer would decide to do it. So they could have all of their employees work 32 hours between Monday through Thursday, as in the example, and no work on Friday for all employees.
If this were to be used to apply for the entire company, could 8 hours be used for one group and 12 hours for another group?
Yes, that is correct. Even with one plan, you can have different reductions among different groups of employees. So in this example, you could have two groups, one at 12 hours and one at 8 hours.
Can you address how the program works once an employer enters into the program? For instance, how does DWD verify employee hours to ensure employers are staying to the plan submitted?
Sure. So WorkShare claimants file weekly claims just the same as those filing for regular unemployment. When claimants file their weekly claims, they report their hours worked, their gross wages, and all other types of pay and the number of hours associated with that pay in the week. Unemployment insurance pays based on the information that the claimant reports on that weekly claim, and then sends to you, the employer, UCB 23, which is a yellow form, and that is sent to the employers to verify or correct wages or other types of pay. The form does only need to be returned if the information on that form needs to be corrected or something needs to be added, or an eligibility issue would need to be raised.
Is there any type of a cheat sheet, for example, with screenshots that could be printed out with instructions for employees on how to submit for this once the company's set up on the plan?
So applying for WorkShare is the same as applying for regular unemployment, at least on the employee side. So there are videos on our website on how to register for services, how to file that initial application, as well as how to file the weekly claims. These videos would be a very good resource for employees to view before they start the application process.
If an employee is laid off or terminated, does the employer need to modify or amend the plan?
So if the employee is not going to be eligible for benefits under the WorkShare program for greater than 3 consecutive weeks, then a modification should be submitted to remove that individual.
Are there any circumstances where a termination or layoff is allowed?
Employers may discharge employees or lay them off. Those employees then are no longer considered to be part of that WorkShare plan.
And then a follow-up on that, if not, or if it's not an approved circumstance to terminate a layoff, what happens if a company does have to lay someone off? Does the plan end? Is there any penalty if they have to lay someone off? And if so, what is that penalty?
So the plan would still continue as long as it requires the 2 required participants, Wisconsin participants. There is no penalty. The only possible penalty might be early termination to the plan, but if the department ever notices anything with a plan that could cause us to terminate the plan early for any reason, we would first attempt to reach out to the employer and try to fix any discrepancy if possible.
What happens if someone in the WorkShare unit works more hours than in the application for 1 week?
So if there is just a slight variation in the hours, and as long as the hours fall within that 10 to 60% range, it would still be considered a WorkShare week.
What happens if someone in a WorkShare unit returns to working full-time hours?
So if the person is expected to be back to work full-time for more than 3 weeks, then the employer should submit a modified plan to have them removed from the WorkShare program.
Can this program work for employees whose hours change weekly based on workload?
The intent is that the reduction would be a set number of hours, but it is understood that there can be slight variations each week. And as long as those variations fall within the 10 to 60% range, that week would still be considered a WorkShare week.
If an employee works a fluctuating schedule, say 36 hours one week, 48 hours the next, what should be used as the core number of normal hours?
So the maximum that could be used for normal hours would be 40 hours. So in this situation, even if we average to the 36 and the 48, the maximum that could be used would be 40 hours.
So let's say a company does enter the WorkShare plan and they get busy for 2 weeks. Can employees work and not collect for those 2 weeks and then go back on the plan in the 5th or 6th week?
Sure. So the recommendation is that the employees still file weekly claims. And in this situation, in order to keep their claims open, rather than having to reopen their claims in the weeks when they are back to the reduction in hours, when they file those weekly claims, they'll just simply receive a notification that they're ineligible for benefits for that week. And they just need to be sure that they report the total number of hours and wages reported or that they performed in that particular week.
So how does holiday, vacation, sick pay, how does that impact weekly hours for someone in a WorkShare unit?
Sure. So the WorkShare plan actually takes into account all hours of work and pay. So we look at the total hours for the week that would be used to calculate the amount of benefits payable. So if someone has, for example, 30 hours of work and 2 hours of vacation pay, the total number of hours used to calculate the benefit eligibility for the week would be the 32 hours.
If a company ends the WorkShare plan before a specified end date on the application, can they apply for the program again for the same people during a 5-year time frame, as long as it doesn't exceed a 6-month limit?
So the employer would want to terminate the plan with the department in order to save the weeks for the affected work unit. And then the earliest date that a plan can be terminated is the second Sunday after the department has been notified in writing.
If the company applies for 6 months of the WorkShare plan, but only use 2, let's say June and July, can they pick it back up in November, December?
Yes, the employer will need to submit an early termination to the plan in order to save those 4 months for later use.
Is there any type of criteria that they cannot use to terminate someone who's participating in the program?
The employer simply needs to be sure that to continue to have at least 2 participants in the plan in order to continue the WorkShare plan. If you do fall between 2 participants, then the department may terminate your plan early.
If there was a 20% reduction in hours, say 32 hours a week for an employee who earns a wage of $16.50 an hour, how does the WorkShare program treat an employee if he or she has worked 14 hours and then had 18 hours of PTO for a combined total of 32 hours? Does the PTO change the calculation and eligibility?
So the total hours of wages and total hours of other pay are used to determine eligibility. So in this particular example, if there are 14 hours of work and 18 hours of PTO or paid time off for a total of 32 hours, it would be paid the same as if the employee had worked a full 32 hours in the week. It's calculated in the same manner. So for example, if the weekly benefit rate is $370, which is the maximum benefit amount, and the reduction is 20%, so down to 32 hours a week, we would take that $370 times the 0.20, which is $74. So the employee in this situation would have gross wages of whatever their pay is for 32 hours, plus the $74, plus then currently the $600 under the federal pandemic unemployment compensation, for a total of $674. If the employee And so this would apply whether the employee worked all 32 hours or if they had combined wages and vacation pay or holiday pay of 32 hours, it would be calculated in the same way. The total hours times the, taking into account the total number of hours worked, looking at what that percentage of reduction is. So the weekly benefit rate times that percentage of reduction, and then rounded down to the nearest whole dollar.
Heidi, that's the end of the questions that had been submitted by those who I reached out to. So I would like to thank you again for your time and cooperation and participating in providing additional guidance for the WorkShare program. I'd also like to thank those who submitted questions for today's presentation, as well as those who are in attendance and joining us today. If you have submitted questions, or if you'd like to submit questions to the Workforce Development Board, specifically to me or to Aaron or Chris, please feel free to do so, and we will work with Heidi to get those answers for you. But that concludes today's presentation. I would like to thank everybody once again and wish you a good day. Thank you.